I told myself we wouldn't be doing this again, and yet here I am. Hello, welcome back to my channel. Over the past 13 days, I've read 13 thrillers. Unlike 90% of my videos, I did not actually set out or intend to read this many books in this many days, or in the same genre, really. After reading those 27 romances for my BuzzFeed video, I told myself I would never do anything like this again. I would never pick this kind of torture for myself. But I also found myself in a particular mood. For some context, I've been getting to work early every day for the past month or so, and that additional hour in the morning of solitude has just been chef's kiss perfection. And I found that there was no better compliment to my solitude than starting the day with a book about murder. So after 4 days of finishing a thriller each day around lunchtime, I decided, fuck it, let's make this a video. Because while I enjoy thrillers, it's definitely a new to me genre, and I don't feel like I fully know my genre preferences yet. What tropes I enjoy, what sorts of things I prefer, do I fall more on the mystery side or the thriller side of things? And I'm not going to pretend like this was some sort of grand experiment, but I do think I can say with some degree of certainty now that I know what kind of thrillers work for me and what don't. So without further ado, let me talk about the 13 books that I've read over the past 13 days. Number 1, Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. Right off the bat, I picked a total fucking dud. This was a 1-star read for me for so many reasons. As I said, I think a big part of this experience was figuring out what I really like in thrillers and what I really fucking loathe. We open up the book and our heroine, who is characterized as a frumpy alcoholic with nothing going for her, except keeping her son from her ex-husband, we find out she has been sleeping with some random guy from a bar. Pretty quickly, of course, we realize this random guy is not so random after all. It is her new boss, who of course is married. But it is not enough simply to be sleeping with her boss. After a series of events, she eventually develops a friendship with her boss's wife, Adele, who is of course unaware of her husband's infidelity. All the while, of course, Louise continues to fuck Adele's husband. As time goes by and Adele continues to confide in Louise, we're trying to figure out what is going on between the husband and the wife, because there seems to be more than meets the eye, besides just the cheating. So right off the bat, we have a pathetic heroine and married couple drama with cheating. Not a good look. And then the plot twists start kicking in, and I'm really asking myself, is this bitch actually for real? Is the author really going there? And she does, in fact, go there. To really get into my issues that I have with this book, I feel like I have to go into spoilers, and that's going to happen often in this video, so I'm gonna flash a little spoiler warning and keep it up until I'm done talking about spoilers. A seemingly random component of this book is the fact that Adele and Louise both abuse prescription drugs and go on these so-called dream walks, whatever the fuck that means. We figure out at the end of the book that Adele ends up killing herself, but she is not actually dead because she dream walks into Louise's body before she can kill off her host body, her regular body. So now she is inhabiting Louise's body and she can live happily ever after with her husband, who has been cheating on her with Louise. So now she's in Louise's body. But oh no, it gets better. Adele's best friend that she met as a teen back when she was in the psych ward, he has been dreamwalking in Adele's body. So we have a guy pretending to be a woman, pretending to be another woman. If that sounds convoluted and completely fucking stupid, that's because it is indeed all of those things. This book was a really big lesson for me, I think, because I figured out that I don't really like supernatural or speculative elements in thrillers. I feel like it's very lazy most of the time. I say that I haven't read that many thrillers with this sort of speculative twist in it, but from the ones I have read, it seems like a lazy and convenient way to try to tie things up or make things interesting, and it just doesn't work for me. And to be honest, it kind of blows my mind that I decided to pick up more thrillers after this, but I feel like we should be unsurprised at this point because I'm a glutton for punishment. Number 2, The Wife Between Us by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. So we're on an upward trend, but don't get excited because this also wasn't that great. I picked this one up because I was really impressed by the author duo's second book, which was called An Anonymous Girl. This is their first book, and I've heard from some people that if you read one of these books and enjoy it, you're probably not going to enjoy the other book. It seems like you can't like both. And I should have listened to those people because this was such a fucking dud for me. So the story is told from 2 points of view. One is a happy girl about to enter into a marriage with a seemingly perfect guy. And the other point of view is from a woman who's either jealous or unhinged over the aforementioned perfect guy who ends up leaving her. Already kind of sus, because I think having the whole unhinged crazy woman over a man thing is a little bit overdone unless handled in a unique way. But anyway, there's 2 reasons that this book was just not for me. First, I don't think it's much of a spoiler, and the second one is, so let me get to the first one first. First reason I don't like this is because domestic violence and abuse is used as a plot twist. I wish I could eloquently psychologize my distaste for this particular trope, but I just really can't stand when domestic violence is used as a cheap plot twist. I understand it's a really real occurrence, it definitely happens in real life, but it feels cheapened when it's used as a plot device in a mystery thriller. Moving on to my biggest issue with this book, really. Honestly, it kind of is a few issues if I'm being real honest. But spoiler, the 2 points of view in this book are actually the same woman. It's her falling for her husband in the past, and and then her in the present trying to save another woman from her same fate. We, as I just mentioned, also figure out that her husband is abusive towards her, and that's the whole reason that she was looking to leave this relationship in the first place, and that she found a way to orchestrate a way out of her marriage that would get another woman trapped in her place. Essentially, she made her husband fall for another woman and make it seem like it was his idea to leave her. Now, off the bat, I feel like this could be a pretty brilliant plot twist, but the addition of the domestic violence makes things a little bit muddy for me. Even though this woman is abused, it's really hard to sympathize when she is trying to get another woman in her shoes. I think had the reason for her wanting to leave her husband been different, I would have actually enjoyed this book more, because then at least we could have kind of resolutely hated her or kind of resolutely understood the reasons why she would try to get out of this relationship and trap another woman. And I'm assuming the authors wanted our main character to be sympathetic, and that's the whole reason that the domestic violence was put into place, but it kind of had the opposite of the intended effect on me. But beyond that, I think the whole misleading point of view thing that makes up the majority of the twist element of this thriller didn't work for me because I listened to this book on audio. I honestly just ended up feeling confused midway through the book. I was like, wait, am I missing something? And I understand that that was the author's intention, but when you're listening on audio, it's a different reading experience, and it did not work well at all. I think for a lot of people, this is going to be a really impressive book, and it's going to be a very new thing if you've not read a twist like this before, but it just didn't work for me. Number 3, Lock Every Door by Riley Sager.
Incredible, amazing, show-stopping.
Not often do I come across modern thrillers that aren't a drunk wife out for revenge against her shitty, cheating husband, so when I do, a book automatically gets a kiss of approval. But when a book is this inventive and this spooky and makes me want to start a class war, it's getting an open-mouth tongue kiss from me. So Lock Every Door by Riley Sager is about a girl named Jules with no friends, no family, and she's looking for a place to stay in New York City. So she comes across an ad about apartment sitting in a historic building named the Bartholomew, but even though there are a lot of rules attached to living there and the pay seems too good to be true, she decides to go for it. But as time goes by, another apartment sitter ends up going missing in Jules's building, a girl named Ingrid, and Jules is determined to start figuring out the secrets of this apartment building. And why the fuck there are so many rules attached to this really spooky old place. So I loved so much about this, but I think the biggest thing, aside from the reveal and the spoilers, was the originality of the plot and just the overall tone. You just had an overwhelming sense of foreboding the entire time you're reading, and that, I don't know, it's unique. It doesn't happen that often when you're actually reading a thriller. So let's get into spoilers. So basically, the secret of the building is that it is being used to harvest organs for the wealthy. The apartment sitters are always people who have come from kind of isolated backgrounds. The person who ends up like interviewing the apartment sitters makes sure that they don't have any family or any friends close by, and they try to tempt them with money and obviously lodgings. And then they one day eventually go missing and they have nobody to look for them. So they're kind of the ideal candidate for organ harvesting, if you will. The other tenants of the apartment complex are kind of older people, old politicians, old writers, old actors, and they're, you know, dying, looking for a kidney, a liver. And I think the reveal is so dark and ominous because of the language surrounding it. The person, the doctor who ends up doing some of these procedures, he is someone that becomes very close to Jules over the course of the book. So when he reveals the fact that she is not good enough to live, that she is only here to sustain the lives of others, it feels really fucking spooky, and it definitely makes you think about the old people living in our society leeching off of the young. You know what I mean? It was really twisted and it was really great. And I think the social commentary aspect ends up feeling so delicious because Jules ends up killing the person who is orchestrating all of this. If you want to burn the rich, the answer is to read this book. And the lesson I learned is that a clever mystery with applicability to today's social climate beats an anxiety-inducing thriller any day of the week. Number 4, Here and Gone by Halen Beck. So big ups for synopsis on this one, but I wouldn't consider this much of a mystery or very thrilling aside from the last 80% of this book. This book is about a woman who is escaping an abusive relationship with her 2 kids in the back of her car. I think she's driving through the desert in Arizona and she is pulled over by a cop. Pretty quickly we figure out that this cop is a little bit shady. He ends up trying to arrest this woman and he calls a deputy to come and take her 2 children while she is in jail. A day later, when the woman wakes up in her cell, she asks the cop, "Where are my kids? How are they doing?" And the cop says, "What kids?" Over the course of the book, we see that this woman is being framed for the disappearance of her children, and we're also getting the point of view of her kids who have been basically kidnapped by this deputy. So see what I mean? It's not necessarily a mystery because we're getting both points of view and we're understanding what is happening. The only real thriller element that comes out is in the last part of the book when we're figuring out why the kids have been kidnapped in the first place, and also if they're going to end up being reunited with their mom. My main issue with this book is that I was simultaneously bored and quite anxious while reading, which doesn't make for a very palatable combination. It's like the author was brainstorming and came up with this really cool synopsis, but didn't do any other work in filling out a plot that was fascinating and fast-paced and thrilling. Now let me tell you the one twist in the book, the one reveal that I think a lot of people probably guessed when I told you guys what this book is about. The kids are kidnapped to be sold into sex trafficking. I feel like from the beginning you can probably guess that. It's either going to go one of 2 ways. Either the cop knowingly ends up kidnapping these kids with his deputy so that they can like abuse and kill the kids themselves, or they're going to end up selling the kids for money, which is what happens. They end up trying to sell these children into sex trafficking. Anyway, the kids end up being reunited with the mom at the very last last second, and she is aided by a guy whose kid also disappeared from a similar small town in a similar fashion. That guy ends up killing all of the people who were involved in the sex trafficking ring, and the mom obviously is reunited with her kids, so all's well that ends well, but also I just don't care about this book. Number 5, The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. So after reading 3/4 of the last books, I feel like I had been eating McDonald's every day for every single meal, and then someone asked, would you like to indulge in a 5-course meal with your favorite foods? Because this was fucking fire. This was so sophisticated and really confirms my suspicions that what sets Karen Slaughter apart from other thriller authors is her realistic characters and her kick-ass characterization. So I think of the 2 books that I've read by Karen Slaughter, this is definitely the most tame of the 2, but the intro in this book is one that made me put the book down for a few months and then try to revisit it because it was that brutal and that shocking. So the story opens up with Samantha, the elder of 2 sisters, as she is kind of describing what is happening in her life at this particular moment in time. Her family has recently moved into a new house because her old house burned down. Her dad is an attorney who ends up defending people who are usually not the best people. Other people in her town are kind of retaliating against this and retaliating against her father, and they end up burning her house down. We also find out that while her parents are very much in love, they don't necessarily have the best relationship, and we also find out that her mom is a little bit different than other moms. Not a bad mom, but a little bit different. And then everything kind of comes to a screeching halt when her mother ends up being murdered in their home, and the 2 sisters have to kind of flee and fight for their lives. And at the end of this introduction, we don't know what happens and what the fate is of these 2 girls. Then we jump to present day, and we are in Charlotte's mind, the other of the 2 sisters, and so obviously we know that she has survived this incident, and we are pretty quickly put into her mind and the situation of the school shooting that happens in her hometown. Charlotte is visiting the school, and she ends up witnessing part of the school shooting, and she thinks that there might be a little bit more than meets the eye because the school shooter in this situation is a young girl with a pretty low IQ. Charlotte can't help but wonder if this girl was maybe put up to this. Over the course of the story, we end up kind of solving the mystery of what happened in the school shooting and also what happened in Samantha and Charlotte's home so many years ago. Every moment of this book felt so steeped in importance, especially compared to all of the other thrillers that I've read. I don't think every book needs to teach you a profound lesson or anything like that, but there is something special about books that are able to do so without beating it over your head a million times. I think the themes of forgiveness and sisterhood really shine through super heavily in this book, and I found myself caring about all of the characters so much so that I ended up crying when I finished this book. And I also appreciated that while this wasn't a shocking, gory read, a lot of the twists were things that I didn't necessarily see coming. I honestly think that the strength of this book was its subtlety and its realistic portrayal of relationships and how people can do bad things. This book was everything. Number 6, Ink and Bone by Lisa Unger. So this book was very similar to Here and Gone, but I'm torn as to which I disliked more. This book opens up with a little girl going on a hike with her father and her brother, and she ends up getting kidnapped. A few months later, our main character, Finley, ends up arriving to live with her grandmother in this same town that this girl was abducted from, and we find out that Finley and her grandmother can both kind of see dead people and can kind of see the future. And Finley is having visions of this girl who has been abducted. So the story deals with Finley trying to kind of fight her inner demons and fight the fact that she can see dead people, and Finley also trying to kind of figure out what has happened to this missing girl and other girls that have been abducted from this small town. The issue that I had with this one was kind of the same as I had with Here and Gone, and it's the lack of mystery. We get 2 main points of view through the story. We get Finley, and we also get the kind of side POV of the girl who has been abducted. So nothing is really tricky here. It's like we're seeing everything that's happening, so what's the mystery? And I don't love cheap tricks or plot twists right at the end of the story, but could you spare a crumb of storyline? And additionally, I didn't end up liking any of the characters. Finley acts like a 35-year-old woman, but we find out that she's actually only 21. And the parents of the missing girl, who we occasionally get little snippets from, are your typical rich, annoying white couple with marital issues. I think in comparison to Here and Gone, I prefer the former because at least that one had a satisfying ending, which leads us into the spoilers. The ending of this book is us essentially figuring out that the girl who went missing at the beginning of the book is not actually the girl whose point of view we're getting throughout the story. The girl who goes missing at the beginning of the book is actually already dead. So that's just fucking sad. There's nothing satisfying about that. Number 7, Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. I know you can be overwhelmed and you can be underwhelmed, but can you ever just be whelmed? Those were my exact thoughts upon finishing Pretty Girls. This book has been perhaps the singular most overhyped book on BookTube in the past few years. Many of my friends have described it as fucked up, gory, the best thriller that they've ever read, so I definitely went into this with high expectations, primarily that I would enjoy this more than The Good Daughter, and I can say right here and right now that that was absolutely not the case. This book felt very unsure of itself. The book starts with our rich main character Claire going to dinner with her husband Paul. After dinner, they decide to try to get freaky in a back alley where Paul ends up being accosted. And before her eyes, Claire's husband is shivved and dies. And when Claire ends up going through Paul's things after the funeral, she figures out that Paul might not have been the man that she thought he was. In addition to Claire's current issues, we find out that she has an elder sister, Julia, who went missing many years ago, that has kind of torn her family apart apart. Additionally, we also get the point of view of a woman named Lydia who hears that Paul is dead and is overjoyed at the news. So the story is about Claire and Julia coming together to solve the mystery of who Paul is and what happened to Julia all those years ago. I just wanted so much more from this story. I feel like there was too much time spent focusing on the heinousness and the gruesomeness of the crimes that we never really got down to the why of it, which was what I was begging for the entire time I was reading. I got to the end of the audiobook with 2 hours left because it was the preview, I guess, for Karen Slaughter's like newest book, and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? This is the end of the book. I thought we were going to get more, and we just never got more. I don't think that books have to be wrapped up in pretty bows necessarily, but literally none of my questions except for the painfully obvious ones were answered. And additionally, none of the character work in this book was particularly good. There's a pivotal scene at the end of the book that I feel like could have been really creepy and could have been a way for our aggressor to kind of admit to his crimes and admit why he did these things, and that just never ends up happening. It was just a completely squandered opportunity in my opinion. So let me pop into spoiler mode so I can truly bitch. So it's clear pretty early on that Paul and his father ended up stalking, killing, and raping post-mortem a bunch of women in this town. Oh, and they ended up selling these snuff films to people. And that Julia, who is Lydia and Claire's sister, was one of the victims of Paul and his father. Already that's not that thrilling to me, which is shocking because I'm sort of a fucking idiot. But if I could see all of these twists coming, I'm sure you guys who have read thrillers before could also see these things coming. But beyond being twisted freaks that are seeking money, why the fuck did they do this? We never get flashbacks and we never get Paul kind of admitting to why he's doing this. You think at the very end, at least, he would want to kind of admit to Claire why he was doing all of these things. We never fucking get that, which is crazy because Paul was a victim himself. He was indoctrinated by his father to kill all of these women. So it would have been interesting to see if he was already twisted, how much of that was kind of the impact of his father. And we also never really get to see Paul's deep connections with the police because, spoiler alert, Paul is not actually dead and the police helped him fake his death. So for him to have those sorts of connections with the police, how did those form? How did those come to be? Not having all of these questions answered for me made this story feel incredibly incomplete. And then on top of that, I think that Karen was trying to make us care about the relationship between Lydia and Claire as the book progresses, but we never got any insight into their relationship before they're coming together again. I also didn't really feel sympathetic towards their sister relationship because the whole reason that Lydia hates Paul so much is because Paul attempted to rape her back in the day and Claire didn't believe Lydia. So it's like, do you really want me to care about these sisters becoming friends when Claire is obviously a piece of shit? Can I tell you how I wish the story went? I wish Paul would have stayed dead. I wish we had gotten flashbacks to Lydia, Claire, and Julia and their sister relationship, and I wish that Lydia and Claire would have worked hard to figure out what Paul did and kind of the why behind it all. Honestly, the only reason that Paul needed to stay alive in this book was to end up torturing Lydia, which I think was a ridiculous choice given the fact that she is almost assaulted by Paul in the past. Like, why do we have to make her go through all of this other torture except for just that gratuitous horror element? It was too much. We didn't need it. All of that to say, I think this is better than a lot of thrillers, but it wasn't great and it definitely was not as well thought out and well crafted as The Good Daughter, so I'm giving this 3 stars. Number 8, The Chalk Man by CJ Tudor. I can't tell if I'm stupid or if this book is stupid, but I'm gonna take the narcissistic route here and assume that this book is actually just quite dumb. The premise of this book was intriguing enough and I didn't actually hate the writing, but ultimately I felt like the plot twists were too out of nowhere and too unpredictable for it to be a satisfying thriller. And I don't mean that I'm incapable of suspending my disbelief in certain scenarios, but the plot twist here didn't feel natural or, oh, okay, that makes sense. I should have seen that coming, like a good plot twist would. So this book is told in the past and the present. It's about a guy named Eddie and his friends, and when they're friends, a girl ends up getting murdered and no one knows who did it. And then we're also brought to the past with Eddie and some of his friends are going missing and becoming murdered. So we're trying to figure out who killed this girl in the past, who's killing his friends now. Meh. I don't even think we actually figure out who does it, which I think is the most frustrating part of this book. It was so lazy and so nonsensical, and I really don't want to get into the details because this was easily the most boring book that I read this entire time. It was very middle of the road. It wasn't so appallingly bad that I feel like I need to rant about it, but it also was not so good that I feel like I need to extol its virtues. I want to not talk about it. So go and hop on Goodreads for more details if you want, or don't if you appreciate good logic. Number 9, My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. So this is a book that I originally had no idea what to rate, but in hindsight, I appreciate the fuck out of this book for subverting tropes and having a bad bitch main character. So this book is about a couple who kills together. I don't think we're ever given the husband's name, but the wife's name is Millicent. It all kind of starts when Millicent's unhinged sister comes and tries to harm Millie. Millicent recounts all of the things that her sister did to her in the past, and it was truly psychopathic shit to make it look like she was harming herself. One day the sister comes to their house and Millie's husband kills her. And then Millicent and her husband both realize it's actually kind of fun to kill people. So over the course of a few years, the husband's job is to find these women for them to both kill, and they end up killing people together. They make sure that all of the women fit the profile for a murderer who committed crimes in their town a few years ago, so that way they're not caught. Until one day there's a bit of a slip up. One of the bodies of the women that Millicent and her husband killed ends up being discovered discovered. And this woman, it turns out, has been held captive for a year and tortured before she ends up getting murdered, and her husband had no knowledge of that. So obviously, Millie has been hiding some things from her husband. And maybe her husband hasn't been telling her everything either. Before I get into spoilers, I just want to say, this is the way that you take marital issues and make them interesting and fresh. So let's get into spoilers. So we find out that Millie is really the psycho. The sister that had been torturing Millie for years as a kid, turns out that Millie was actually the one torturing her sister instead. And Millie has been doing everything in her power over the past few years to make sure that all of the murders that her and her husband commit end up looking like only the husband committed them. She has been tracking everything he does for years and ends up pinning all of these murders on him when the bodies end up turning up. Oh yeah, and she's been poisoning her kids for years. It was cool as shit, and I don't mean the fact that she ended up poisoning her kids, but I mean the drama of it all. It all culminates ultimately with Millie being killed by her husband and her children, and the husband and kids end up moving to Europe, where we find out that the husband might still be killing women. I know a lot of people ended up taking issue with the fact that this book ends in a mildly anticlimactic manner because Millie never ends up kind of owning up to why she's been doing these things and what provoked her to kill all of these people in the first place. But I kind of appreciate the fact that even though her husband was cheating on her throughout the course of the book, the reason that Millie ends up killing a lot of people, it's not pinned on the fact that her husband did any one thing. We don't have a crazy unhinged woman with kind of an explanation behind it. Sometimes women are just crazy, and sometimes women can do fucked up shit, and I liked that there was a lack of explanation. I also like that there weren't any truly innocent characters in this book. Everybody kind of kills, and everybody has their issues, and maybe they were kind of made for each other. Number 10, Roanoke Girls by Amy Engel. Okay, this book. I typed the notes for this video before filming, and I have to tell you that this was definitely the hardest book to try to summarize and to try to put all of my feelings in a neatly wrapped box. But I will say that this book really got to the heart of the issues that it was trying to address. So the book is about a girl named Lane who ends up going to live with her grandparents after her mother has committed suicide. Growing up, Lane heard that the house that her grandparents live in is kind of a shitty place to live. She's never heard anything good about it, and so she's kind of scared to go and live with her grandparents. When she gets there, she realizes her cousin is living there and that this is actually a really happy place, and she is kind of forced to reckon with the fact that her mom hated this place, but also she's having a really good time here and she is experiencing a lot of love. Because as Lane grew up, she realized that her mom was not necessarily a fit mother, and that maybe Roanoke, the place where Lane is going to live with her grandparents, might be the place where she's supposed to be after all. But not too fast. Lane ends up finding out that the secret of the Roanoke house and the reason why Lane's mother hated it so much is because so many women have either run away or died while living in this house, which is rather shocking. The book is told in the past and present, as Lane is kind of trying to figure out more about the house in the past, and in the present she is trying to figure out what happened to her cousin that she lived with in the past now that her cousin has run away. So unfortunately, I can't really share what I liked about this book without getting into spoilers, so let's go ahead and do that now. Basically, every woman that has ever lived in this house has been groomed to sleep with Lane's grandfather. Her mom, her aunts, her cousins, even her. It's incredibly fucked up and sad, and it's even more sad when you start to realize how these women became prey in a situation where from the outside looking in, you'd totally be like, ew, like he wasn't physically abusive to you, so why would you like jump into bed with him? You figure out the cycle of abuse, how the grandfather isolates them, how the grandmother never has that maternal feeling and instinct towards the girls. She ends up actually hating all of the women. You figure out how these women are just looking for love from the grandfather because he's the only one that provides affection, and you can understand how they would be led into these more abusive and grooming situations. And since we're in Lane's head in particular, we get to sympathize with her, and we see how abusive her actual mother was, how Lane could be led down this path, how Lane could be tempted in a way by her grandfather. She doesn't end up actually becoming abused by him, but we get to see her kind of struggling with jealousy and wanting to be in this situation that her cousin's in, and how difficult that is for her. We really, really sympathize with her the entire story. It feels wrong to say that I enjoyed this book, but I feel like it did a really skillful job at handling the issues that it tried to tackle. And even though the mystery aspect of this book was the abuse, I don't feel like it was very cheap like in some of the other books that I've talked about, because it was handled so unflinchingly and so honestly. It didn't try to kind of sugarcoat things or use it as just a cheap trick. You can tell that the intent of this story was to kind of show the cycles of abuse and show what grooming can do to people, rather than using those things just as like, oh, and guess what, they were abused. It was like, no, that's like the whole fucking point of the story. And while I don't necessarily recommend it as a mystery, I think it was a really good book, and I'm really, really glad that I picked this up. Number 11, Her Every Fear by Peter Swanson. Am I missing something? Because this was neither a mystery nor thrilling, which is upsetting because the premise of this book and the first 20 to 30% had me really intrigued, but ultimately just fell flat. We open the story with our protagonist Kate flying into Boston. We quickly come to find out that she is swapping her apartment with a cousin that she does not know because she's trying to escape her past, and her cousin conveniently needs a flat in London because he is going there for business for like 6 months or something. But when someone dies next door to Kate in Boston, she starts wondering what kind of man her cousin really is, and what secrets he and others in the building might be hiding. So the secret is that he killed a woman that was two-timing him with the other dude that the woman was two-timing on him with. And that other guy keeps killing people. In fact, he ended up killing Corbin/Kate's neighbor. The end. I'm assuming that the intent of this book is to get you to realize that all men are trash, and I will say it succeeded at that. It did not, however, succeed at being innovative or interesting. Moving on. Number 12, 8 Perfect Murders, also by Peter Swanson. So this is another case of cool premise but really lackluster execution, which kind of makes me not ever want to read a Peter Swanson book ever again, but that's besides the point. This book is about a hunky silver fox who wrote a blog post back in the day about 8 perfect murders in literature. Agatha Christie, that one bitch who wrote The Secret History, etc. And years later, someone is trying to carry out these 8 perfect murders in real life. Also, I lied, our narrator is actually not described as a hunky silver fox, but a prematurely silver-haired bookseller really moistens the old loincloth. Anyway, the guy who wrote the blog post, let's call him Jimmy. He works with a detective to figure out who is committing these crimes and who is trying to kind of frame Jimmy for all of these murders. Spoiler alert, Jimmy is a murderer, and all of this is his fault. He ended up killing his wife at the very beginning of the book for cheating on him, and then he decides that he's going to hire a hitman to kill the man that his wife cheated on him with. And in exchange for having someone go and kill this adultering other guy, he is going to go and kill his hitman's target. Like they're gonna swap, essentially. He does it anyway. Internet hitman ends up finding out who Jimmy is, finds one of Jimmy's blog posts, is inspired after he ends up killing Jimmy's adultering person or whatever, and he's like, you know what, fuck it. I like killing people, I'm gonna do it some more. Why not frame Jimmy while we do so? As you can see, the way in which this man ends up killing Jimmy's acquaintances, it's super interesting. But like, Jimmy doesn't have enough friends for this to be something that you're really invested in. It's like all of these people are dying and you're not thinking like, oh shit, I wonder which of Jimmy's super close friends is killing people. When you get the reveal on who is killing all of these people, you're just like, okay, whatever. And then when you find out, you know, later on in the book, because it's not revealed at the very beginning that Jimmy has killed people, you also just don't really give a shit. You're like a white man killing people. I honestly could have guessed that. I don't know. I wanted to like this more than I did. I just didn't. That brings us to our final book. Number 13, Miracle Creek by Angie Kim. And I have my own plot twist for you. I didn't actually read 13 books in 13 days. I read 12 books in 12 days, and this book I read in like 7 days because it was kind of impossible to get through. That's not to say that this book was bad. I actually did end up enjoying it quite a bit, but it was the only book that I had to read with my eyeballs, and it was decidedly different in pacing than a lot of the other books because this was a courtroom thriller and it ended up reading a lot like literary fiction, which is something that I kind of avoid like the plague. Miracle Creek is a courtroom thriller about a lot of shit. It's basically a story about Korean immigrants who come to America looking for a better life, and they start running a hyperbaric chamber business. The idea is that increasing oxygen flow can help with any sort of ailment. It has been proven, I guess, according to the literature in this book, that it can help cure autism or it can help with any kind of range of symptoms. I think one of the people who ends up going into this hyperbaric chamber has like a low sperm count or something, and for some reason increased oxygen is supposed to help that. So a group of people, mostly women with children with various health issues, they decide to use this technology. One day the chamber explodes due to a fire and one of the mothers is blamed for the fire. Over the course of the trial, we end up finding out details that make it hard to know who is to blame and who we should actually be sympathizing with. Like I said previously, I think this book would have been better categorized as literary fiction, but it does kind of have a mystery element to it as you're trying to figure out, again, who is to blame. But I think that where this book really shines is the realness of the characters and their struggles. I feel like day to day, I don't really think of the microaggressions that immigrants in this country must face, but you definitely get a taste of that in this book. It also looks really unflinchingly at the challenges of what it is like to be a parent to a child with special needs. How you can love your child and also kind of hate the day-to-day. I like that the author doesn't really take a stance on any of these issues. It kind of lets you decide on your own conclusions. And even when the mystery is resolved at the end of the book and justice is served, you kind of still don't know who to think is guilty, and you kind of have to decide that for yourself. This definitely wasn't an easy book to read, but it was definitely a good one to read, and I liked that it was so different than all of the other thrillers that I read for this video. So there you have it. Those are the 13 thrillers that I read in almost 13 days. From truly original to truly mundane, these books kind of ran the gamut, but I'm really glad that I read all of them. I don't have any profound nuggets of knowledge to leave you guys with, but when in doubt, a man probably did it. Love you guys so much, and until next time.